Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight. Wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment, I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I pulled up to the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a dull orange. My hatchback was stuffed to the brim with boxes, everything I owned after the divorce. The place loomed ahead, a two-story relic with chipped paint and a sagging porch. It wasn't much, but it was cheap and I needed a fresh start somewhere. Anywhere. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with charm. I just hoped it had working heat. The air smelled faintly of mildew as I stepped out, gravel crunching under my sneakers. I grabbed the first box, labeled kitchen stuff, and hauled it to the front door. The key stuck in the lock for a second before turning with a groan. Inside, the house was dim, the only light coming from a naked bulb dangling in the entryway. Dust floated in the air and the floorboards creaked under my weight. Typical old house, I told myself. Nothing a good cleaning couldn't fix. I spent the next couple of hours unloading boxes, trying to make the place feel like mine. The living room had a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in decades, and the stairs to the second floor were narrow and steep. Every step I took echoed through the empty space. By the time I dragged my mattress upstairs, I was sweaty and ready to call it a night. The bedroom wasn't bad. Big windows, faded wallpaper with some floral pattern, and a closet that smelled like mothballs. I flopped onto the mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the panes. The first night was quiet, mostly. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint tapping sound. It was coming from downstairs, like someone drumming their fingers on a table. I sat up, straining to hear it over my own breathing. Tap, tap, tap. Probably just the pipes, I figured. Old houses settle, right? I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, I met Mrs. Hargrove. She lived next door, a tiny woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun. I was hauling trash bags to the curb when she shuffled over, leaning on a cane. "You're the new tenant," she said, her voice sharp despite her age. "Hope you've got a strong stomach." I laughed, brushing it off. "It's not that bad. Just need some TLC." She didn't smile. "Folks don't stay long in that house. Last one ran out in the middle of the night, screaming about footsteps. Said something was chasing him. Before that, there was a woman who swore she heard voices. Left all her things behind." I paused, trash bag dangling from my hand. "That's colorful. Probably just tall tales." "Maybe," she said, eyeing the house like it might bite. "But you'll see. That place has a way of getting under your skin." She hobbled back to her yard without another word. I shook my head and went inside. The day passed uneventfully, unpacking, sweeping, trying to ignore the faint musty smell that clung to everything. By evening, I'd set up a little corner in the living room with my TV and a folding chair. I was halfway through a frozen pizza when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time, coming from the kitchen. I got up, pizza slice in hand, and peeked around the corner. Nothing. Just the sink, the fridge, and a couple of unpacked boxes. The tapping stopped as soon as I stepped in. "Pipes," I muttered. "Definitely pipes." That night, I woke up again. This time it wasn't tapping. It was a low thud, like something heavy hitting the floor downstairs. My heart jolted, and I lay there, eyes wide, waiting for it to happen again. Thud. There it was, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my phone, the clock glowing 3:14 a.m. For a second, I thought about going down to check, but my legs wouldn't move. "It's just the house," I told myself. Old wood creaking or something shifting. Thud. I pulled the blanket tighter and stayed put until morning. When daylight finally crept through the windows, I felt silly. I went downstairs, expecting to find a box tipped over or a chair out of place. Everything looked normal. No sign of anything that could have made that noise. I laughed it off over coffee, blaming my imagination and a lack of sleep. Still, as I sipped from my mug, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. Waiting. The next few days blurred together in a haze of unpacking and trying to make the house feel like home. I'd landed a remote tech support gig after the divorce, so my routine was simple. Wake up, coffee, sit at the rickety kitchen table with my laptop, and talk people through rebooting their routers. The house creaked around me all day, floorboards groaning, pipes rattling in the walls. It was annoying, but I got used to it. Kind of. By Wednesday, I'd noticed a few things that didn't sit right. The kitchen always had this faint sour smell like spoiled milk no matter how much I scrubbed. I checked the fridge, the trash, even under the sink. Nothing. It had hit me out of nowhere, then vanished just as quick. Upstairs, the bedroom windows would fog up overnight, even when it wasn't cold out. I'd wake up to blurry glass streaked with condensation, like someone had been breathing on it. I wiped it away each morning and told myself it was just bad insulation. The noises kept up too. That tapping from the first night turned into a regular thing, always late, always downstairs. Sometimes it'd switch to those heavy thuds like boots stomping across the floor. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the sounds until they stopped. 5 thuds, then silence. Or 10 taps, then nothing. I started keeping a flashlight by my mattress just in case. Not that I'd ever gone down to check. I wasn't that brave. Friday afternoon, I decided to tackle the basement. The door was at the back of the kitchen, warped and stuck shut. I yanked it open with a grunt, and a wave of damp air hit me, earthy like wet dirt. The stairs were steep, wooden, and creaked louder than anything else in the house. I flicked the light switch, but the bulb just buzzed and stayed dark. Great. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down. The basement was a mess. Concrete floor, cobwebs in every corner, and stacks of junk left by whoever lived here before. There were old crates, a cracked mirror leaning against the wall, and a rusty bike missing a wheel. I poked around, kicking up dust, until I found a small wooden box tucked behind a shelf. It was heavy, locked with a rusty padlock. I shook it and something rattled inside, loose like coins or dice. I figured it might be worth something, so I hauled it upstairs and set it on the counter. I'd deal with it later. That night, I met the tapping's new friend, a low hum. It started around 1 a.m., vibrating through the walls. I sat up, flashlight in hand, listening. It wasn't mechanical like the fridge or heater. It was softer, almost human, like someone moaning far away. I crept to the bedroom door and cracked it open. The hum got louder, coming from the stairs. I stood there, heart thumping, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. After 5 minutes, I shut the door and shoved a pillow over my head. Eventually, I drifted off. Saturday morning, I was jumpy. The coffee didn't help. My hands shook as I poured it. I kept glancing at the basement door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. Around noon, Mrs. Hargrove stopped by again. I was outside, sweeping the porch, when she waved me over. "You look tired," she said, squinting at me. "House keeping you up?" I forced a smile. "Just adjusting. It's noisier than I thought." She nodded like she'd heard that before. "They all say that. Did I tell you about the man who built it? Elias Crow. Strange fella. Used to live there alone back in the 20s. Folks said he was into dark things. Rituals, books about spirits. Disappeared one night and no one ever found him." I stopped sweeping. "Rituals? Like what?" "Couldn't tell you," she said. "Just rumors. But people swore they'd see lights flickering in the windows long after he was gone. Still do sometimes." She pointed at my house, then turned away. I stared at the windows, half expecting to see a glow. Nothing but cloudy glass. Back inside, I couldn't shake her words. Elias Crow. Rituals. It was ridiculous, old lady gossip, but it stuck with me. That night, the hum came back, louder, joined by footsteps. Heavy, slow, climbing the stairs. I gripped the flashlight, whispering to myself it was just the house. The steps stopped outside my door. Then silence. I didn't sleep. Sunday morning hit me like a truck. I woke up with my face mashed into the mattress, the flashlight still clutched in my hand. My neck ached from sleeping tense all night, and my eyes felt gritty, like I'd been staring into dust. The memory of those footsteps lingered, slow, deliberate, stopping right outside my door. I'd waited for the knob to turn, for something to barge in, but it never did. Just silence, thick and heavy, until I must have passed out from exhaustion. I stumbled downstairs, rubbing my face. The kitchen smelled sour again, sharper this time, like something rotting behind the walls. I opened every cabinet, checked the trash. Nothing. It faded as I stood there, breathing through my mouth. The wooden box from the basement sat on the counter, mocking me. I hadn't touched it since hauling it up, and now it felt like it was watching me back. I shoved it into a drawer and slammed it shut. Coffee was my lifeline. I sat at the table, laptop open, trying to focus on work emails. The house creaked around me, normal daytime stuff, I told myself. Wind against the eaves, old wood settling. But every groan made me flinch, every pop from the pipes had me glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was stupid, divorce stress, new place jitters, but it clung to me like damp air. Around noon I decided to get out. Fresh air, sunlight, something to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and stepped onto the porch. The neighborhood was quiet, just a few leafless trees swaying in the breeze. Mrs. Hargrove's house sat next door, curtains drawn tight. I thought about knocking, asking more about this Elias Crow guy, but she'd probably just spin another creepy yarn. I didn't need that. Instead, I walked to the corner store a few blocks away, bought some bread and a cheap candle, lavender to mask that damn smell, and headed back. The rest of the day was uneventful. I worked, ate a sandwich, watched some mindless TV. The house stayed quiet and I started to relax. Maybe I'd overreacted. Old places make noises. I'd lived in apartments with worse, leaky faucets, loud neighbors. This was just character, like the realtor said. By evening, I lit the candle and set it on the coffee table. The lavender smell was fake and strong, but it beat the sour stench. I went to bed feeling almost normal. That lasted until 2 a.m. I jolted awake, heart pounding, the room pitch black. The flashlight was on the floor. I must have knocked it off in my sleep. I fumbled for it, clicked it on, and swept the beam around. Nothing out of place. Then I heard it, a scrape, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from the closet. I froze, light trained on the door. It was shut, same as always, but the sound kept going. Scrape, pause, scrape. My mouth went dry. I wanted to yell, to demand who was there, but my voice stuck in my throat. It's the house, I thought. Just the house. Maybe a rat or something caught in the walls. The scraping stopped and I let out a shaky breath. Then the door rattled. It wasn't much, just a quick shake like someone had bumped it, but I nearly dropped the flashlight. I stared, waiting, expecting it to swing open. It didn't. Silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. I forced myself to move, inching off the mattress, light steady on the closet. My socks hit the cold floor and I crept closer, every step a loud creak. I reached for the knob, hand trembling, and yanked it open. Empty. Just my unpacked boxes, a few hangers, and that mothball smell. No rats, no nothing. I laughed, a weak, nervous sound, and shut the door. Back in bed, I kept the flashlight on, beam pointed at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy. Monday morning I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, coffee barely keeping me upright. Work was a blur. Half the time I was zoning out, replaying that scrape in my head. I kept the bedroom door open all day, glancing at the closet like it might pull something new. It didn't. The house was quiet, almost smug, like it knew I was rattled and didn't need to try harder. That afternoon I ran into Tom. He was the mail guy, a lanky dude with a patchy beard, dropping off a package at the porch. I was outside, pretending to check the gutters when he waved. "Settling in okay?" he asked, handing me a small box, some cables I'd ordered for work. "Yeah, mostly," I said, forcing a grin. "Place is a little noisy, but I'll live." He nodded, glancing at the house. "Heard that before. Last guy who lived here, big dude, tattoos, said the same thing. Then one day he's gone. Left his truck in the driveway and everything. Cops figured he just skipped town." I frowned. Mrs. Hargrove mentioned him. Said he ran out screaming. Tom shrugged. "Wouldn't surprise me. This place has a rep. People talk, say it's been weird since the old owner vanished." "What's his name?" "Crow." "Elias Crow," I said, the name sticking like a splinter. "That's it. Creepy old nut from what I hear. Anyway, good luck." He tipped his cap and headed off, leaving me with the package and a knot in my stomach. Back inside I couldn't focus. Elias Crow. Rituals. Footsteps, scraping, that hum, all of it swirled in my head. I tried to laugh it off, small town gossip, nothing more, but it wasn't funny anymore. That night, I double-checked the locks, left the hallway light on, and dragged a chair under the bedroom door knob. Paranoid? Maybe. But I wasn't taking chances. Sleep came in fits. I dreamed of the closet, the door creaking open, something dark spilling out, shadowy, shapeless, reaching for me. I woke up gasping, the room freezing. My breath puffed out in little clouds, visible in the flashlight's glow. The windows were shut tight, no drafts, but the cold sank into my bones. Then I heard it, a whisper. Soft, garbled, like words underwater, coming from the walls. I bolted upright, swinging the light around. The whisper faded, but the cold didn't. I sat there, shivering, until dawn broke and the room warmed up. When I finally got out of bed, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just an old house anymore. Tuesday morning, I barely dragged myself out of bed. The cold from last night lingered in my head even though the room was back to normal, stuffy, almost warm. My breath wasn't fogging anymore, but I could still feel that chill in my fingers, like I'd been gripping ice. The whisper I'd heard, or thought I'd heard, stayed with me too, a faint echo I couldn't shake. I told myself it was a dream, left over from that nightmare about the closet. But it didn't feel like a dream. Downstairs, the kitchen was quiet. No sour smell this time, just the faint lavender from the candle I'd left burning too long. The wick was a black stub now, wax pooled on the coffee table. I made coffee, hands still shaky, and sat at my laptop trying to act normal. Work was a slog. Every call I took, "Have you tried turning it off and on?" felt like I was reciting it underwater. My eyes kept darting to the stairs, to the basement door, to that drawer with the locked box. I hadn't opened it yet, and part of me didn't want to. By lunchtime, I needed air again. I grabbed my keys and headed out, locking the door behind me like it mattered. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, and the wind bit at my face as I walked to the store. I didn't need anything, just wanted to be somewhere with people, noise, light. Inside, the clerk barely looked up from his phone as I grabbed a soda and a bag of chips. On my way out, I ran into Tom again, the mail guy leaning against his truck. "Hey, you're still here," he said, grinning like it was a joke. "House hasn't scared you off yet?" I forced a laugh. "Not yet. Just creaky floors and bad dreams." He raised an eyebrow. "Bad dreams, huh? That's how it starts." Last guy, tattoo dude, said he kept dreaming about someone standing in his room. Woke up screaming once, woke me up too. I lived 2 streets over. My stomach twisted. He ever say what it looked like? Nah, just that it was tall. Dark. Kept muttering about it, watching him. Tom shrugged, tossing a package into his truck. "Probably drugs or something. Guy was a mess. You look okay though. Tired but okay." "Yeah, just not sleeping great," I admitted. "It's the noises. Keeps me on edge." He nodded like he got it. "Old houses, man. Crow built that place solid but weird. My grandpa used to say he'd see him out back at night, digging holes, burning stuff. Creepy shit. Anyway, see ya." He climbed into his truck and drove off, leaving me standing there with my soda going warm in my hand. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Digging holes. Burning stuff. Elias Crow was sounding less like a rumor and more like a ghost story with teeth. I tried to focus on work, but every creak from the house felt personal now, like it was testing me. The day dragged on, and by evening, I was jumpy as hell. I microwaved some leftovers, ate in front of the TV, and kept the volume loud to drown out the silence. It didn't help much. Night came too fast. I locked up, checked the windows, and dragged that chair under the bedroom doorknob again. The flashlight stayed in my hand as I climbed onto the mattress, pulling the blanket up to my chin. I left the hall light on, its glow spilling under the door. Sleep wasn't the goal, just surviving until morning. It started around midnight. A thud, loud and sharp, from downstairs. I sat up, heart slamming against my ribs. Another thud, then a slow scrape, like furniture dragging across the floor. I clicked the flashlight on, beam shaky as I aimed it at the door. The chair was still in place, but the sounds kept coming. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. It was rhythmic, deliberate, moving from the living room to the kitchen. I told myself it was pipes, wind, anything, but pipes don't drag. I slid off the mattress, socks silent on the floor, and pressed my ear to the door. The scraping stopped, replaced by a low hum, the same one I'd heard before, soft and mournful. It vibrated through the wood into my skull. I stumbled back, breath hitching. Then footsteps. Heavy, plodding, climbing the stairs. 1 step. 2. 3. I counted them, frozen as they got closer. The hall light flickered just once, and the air turned cold, sharp, biting cold, like stepping into a freezer. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I swear I heard breathing, slow, raspy, right on the other side. I gripped the flashlight, waiting for the knob to turn, for the chair to slide. Nothing moved. The breathing faded, and the cold eased up, leaving me sweaty and shaking. I didn't sleep after that. When dawn finally broke, I checked the house. Nothing was out of place. No dragged furniture, no footprints, no sign of anything. The chair was still wedged tight. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but my skin still prickled and my chest felt tight. Work was impossible. I called in sick, blaming a cold, and spent the day pacing, jumping at every sound. Around noon I caved. I pulled the wooden box out of the drawer, set it on the table, and stared at it. It was old, carved with faint swirls that might have been letters once. The padlock was rusted shut, but I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and smashed it open. The lid creaked as I lifted it, and inside was a bundle of papers, yellowed, brittle, tied with a frayed string. I untied it, hands unsteady, and spread them out. They were letters, handwritten in spidery ink. The top one was dated October 12, 1923, signed, Elias Crow. My pulse quickened as I read the first line. The voices grow louder each night, and the air bends where they stand. I stopped, staring at the words. Voices. Air bending. It was too close, too real. I shoved the papers back in the box and slammed it shut, my breath coming fast. Whatever this was, I didn't want it. That night, I didn't bother with the chair. I sat up, flashlight on, listening as the house came alive. The thuds returned, the hum wove through the walls, and the footsteps climbed again, stopping at my door. But this time, I heard a whisper, clear as anything, "Open it." My blood ran cold. The box sat downstairs untouched, but I knew that's what it meant. And I knew deep down I couldn't ignore it much longer. The letters. Wednesday morning, I woke up slumped against the headboard, flashlight still on and half dead in my lap. My neck screamed from the awkward angle, and my mouth tasted like stale fear. That whisper, "Open it," had drilled into my skull all night, sharp and real, not some half-dream nonsense. The bedroom was quiet now, sunlight poking through the foggy windows, but it didn't feel safe. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. I stumbled downstairs, bare feet slapping the cold floor. The wooden box sat on the kitchen table where I'd left it, looking heavier somehow, like it had grown overnight. I avoided it, making coffee instead, but my eyes kept sliding back. Those letters, Elias Crow's words, were in there, and they'd already hooked me with that first line. The voices grow louder each night. My hands shook as I poured the coffee, spilling some on the counter. I didn't clean it up. Work wasn't happening. I emailed my boss some vague excuse, migraine, stomach bug, whatever, and shut the laptop. The house creaked around me, louder in the daytime silence, like it was stretching its bones. I paced the living room, glancing at the stairs, the basement door, the box. My skin crawled every time I got close to it, but I couldn't leave it alone. That whisper had been too clear, too close. I knew I'd heard it. By noon I gave in. I sat at the table, pulled the box over, and dumped the letters out. They smelled old, musty like damp paper, and the ink was faded in spots, but I could still read most of it. I started with the first one again, dated October 12, 1923. Elias's handwriting was messy, slanted, like he'd been in a hurry. The voices grow louder each night, and the air bends where they stand. I thought it was the wind at first, or the drink, but it's neither. They come from below, from the earth itself, and they call my name. I've begun the rites as the book instructs, marking the floors with salt and ash. It quiets them for a time, but not long. I stopped, my throat tight. Voices from below. Right. Salt and ash. It was crazy, some nutcase rambling, but it hit too close. The hum, the footsteps, that whisper. I flipped to the next letter, dated a week later. October 19, 1923. The shadow moved tonight. I saw it in the cellar, tall and thin, stretching across the wall where no light should cast it. The book warned of this. Open the door and they come through. I didn't mean to, not fully, but the words slipped out during the last rite. Now it watches. I feel its eyes, even in the day. My coffee went cold as I read. A shadow. Tall. Tom's words echoed back. The last guy dreaming of something dark standing in his room. I wanted to laugh, to toss the letters and call it bullshit, but my chest felt heavy, like something was sitting on it. I kept going, flipping through more pages. Each one got worse. November 3rd, 1923. The cold follows me now. It seeps from the walls, clings to my skin. The shadow speaks, not words I know, but I feel them pressing into my mind. And once more. The book says blood will bind it, but I can't. I won't. I hear footsteps at night, circling the house. They stop at the door. I drop the paper, hands sweaty. Footsteps. Cold. It was like Elias was writing about my nights, not his. The last letter was shorter, undated, the ink smeared like he'd been shaking. They're here. The rites failed. The door is open and I can't close it. If anyone finds this, burn the house. Burn it all. That was it. No signature, just that jagged plea. I stared at the words, my pulse thudding in my ears. Burn the house. I shoved the letters back in the box, slammed the lid and pushed it away. My chair scraped as I stood, pacing again, trying to breathe. It was old ramblings, that's all. Some guy losing his mind a century ago. But the parallels, the voices, the shadow, the cold, kept clawing at me. The day dragged on in a haze. I didn't touch the box again, but I felt it there, heavy in the room. The house stayed quiet, no creaks or thuds, but that made it worse. like it was waiting for night. I ordered a pizza, ate half without tasting it, and sat on the couch, staring at the TV without seeing it. My mind looped over Elias's words. The door is open. What door? What had he done? Night fell and I couldn't stall anymore. I locked up, dragged the chair under the doorknob, and sat on the mattress, flashlight ready. The hall light buzzed faintly, casting shadows that twitched if I stared too long. I tried to sleep, but my eyes wouldn't close. The house was too still, too quiet. It started at 1 a.m. A thud from downstairs, sharp enough to jolt me upright. Then another and another, like something pacing the living room. I gripped the flashlight, beam cutting through the dark, aimed at the door. The thud stopped and the hum kicked in, low, vibrating, coming from the walls. It grew louder, buzzing in my teeth until I couldn't stand it. I yelled, "Stop it." Dumb, desperate, and it did. Silence crashed in, heavy and wrong. Then the footsteps came. Slow, deliberate, climbing the stairs. 1, 2, 3. I counted, breath shallow, as they reached the landing. The cold hit next, sharp and sudden, turning my fingers numb. The hall light flickered, dimming, and I heard it again, that whisper. "Open it." Clearer this time, right outside the door. The knob rattled, a quick jerk, and the chair slid an inch. I lunged, shoving it back, heart hammering. "Get out!" I shouted, voice cracking. The rattling stopped, but the cold didn't lift. I sat there, back against the door, flashlight shaking in my hand, until the light steadied and the air warmed. When I finally checked, the hall was empty, the chair still wedged tight. But I knew something had been there. Morning came slow. I didn't sleep, just sat, staring at the door, replaying it all. The letters were real. The noises were real. Whatever Elias had started, it wasn't gone. I stumbled downstairs, bleary-eyed, and froze. The box was open on the table, letters scattered across it. I hadn't touched it since yesterday. My stomach dropped and I backed away, hands trembling. This wasn't just an old house anymore. It was alive and it wanted something from me. Digging deeper. Thursday morning, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the box and its spilled letters like they might lunge at me. I hadn't touched them, hadn't even gone near the table since shoving them back in yesterday. But there they were, fanned out, the top one glaring up with Elias's scrawl. The door is open. My hands wouldn't stop shaking and my coffee sat untouched, cooling in its mug. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that presses down, daring you to break it. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. The footsteps, the cold, the whisper. It wasn't pipes or bad dreams. Something was here, and those letters proved it wasn't new. Elias Crow had messed with something 100 years ago, and now it was messing with me. I needed answers, not just his crazy ramblings. I grabbed my phone, hands fumbling, and started searching. Elias Crow, plus the town's name. If he'd lived here, died here, whatever, there had to be a trace. The results were thin. A few old newspaper archives mentioned him. A recluse, owned this house from 1918 to 1924, vanished without a trace. One article, dated 1925, called it the Crow Mystery. Neighbors reported strange lights, noises, said he'd been digging in the yard at odd hours. No body, no sign of him after that last winter. The house sat empty for years until someone else moved in, then another, none staying long. I scrolled through forums too where locals swapped stories. Haunted, they called it. Cursed. One guy claimed his uncle saw a figure in the windows in the 70s, tall and shadowy, just standing there. My stomach churned. It lined up too well. Elias's letters, the shadow he wrote about, the crap I was living through. I kept digging, found a mention of a library downtown with old records. If there was more on Crow, deeds, diaries, anything, I'd find it there. I grabbed my jacket, locked the box in a cabinet like that'd keep it quiet, and headed out. The air outside was crisp, gray clouds hanging low, but it felt safer than staying in. The library was small, smelled like old paper and dust. The librarian, a guy with thick glasses and a bored stare, pointed me to the local history section after I mumbled something about researching the house. I hauled out boxes of microfiche, grainy scans of newspapers, property records, whatever I could find. Elias's name popped up again. He'd bought the land in 1918, built the house himself. No family, no heirs. A 1924 clipping said he'd been eccentric, caught buying weird books from a traveling salesman. Occult stuff, grimoires. The word stuck in my throat. Rituals. The book he'd mentioned. I found one more thing, a grainy photo of him standing on the porch. Thin, tall, hollow-eyed, staring at the camera like he hated it. The house looked newer then, but the same sagging shape, the same dark windows. I printed it, hands sweaty, and kept searching. An hour later, I hit gold. A police report from 1925. Someone had broken in after he disappeared, found salt lines on the floors, ash piles in the basement, and a book, leather-bound, half-burned, locked in a trunk. They called it Ramblings of a Madman, and tossed it. No mention of where it went. I sat back, head spinning. Salt and ash like the letter said. A book. Whatever Elias had done, it wasn't just crazy, it was real, and it had left something behind. I stuffed the printouts in my bag and left, the librarian barely glancing up. Outside, the sky was darker, wind sharper. I walked fast, pulse racing, feeling like eyes were on me the whole way home. The house was waiting when I got back. No noises, no cold, just that heavy silence. I dumped the papers on the table, next to the box I'd locked away. The cabinet door hung open, the box sitting there like I'd never moved it. My breath caught, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I spread out the printouts, piecing it together. Elias, the rights, the shadow, it all pointed to the basement. They come from below, he'd written. I hadn't gone down there since finding the box, but now it felt like a neon sign flashing in my head. I grabbed the flashlight, its beam weak from overuse, and opened the basement door. The damp smell hit me hard, earth and rot, and the stairs groaned louder than before. I took it slow, one hand on the wall, the light bouncing off cracked concrete. The junk was still there, crates, the mirror, that rusty bike, but it felt different. Smaller, tighter, like the space was closing in. I swept the beam around, looking for salt lines, ash, anything Elias might have left. Then I saw it, a patch of floor near the back, darker than the rest, stained black. I knelt, touched it, dry, rough like old soot. Nearby, faint white streaks crisscrossed the concrete, salt, maybe faded by time. My heart thudded as I stood, light shaking. This was it, where he'd done it. The right, the door. I backed up, ready to bolt, when the flashlight caught something, a glint under a crate. I shoved it aside and found a small metal box, rusted shut, about the size of a paperback. I pried it open with my keys, hinges screaming. Inside was a single page, torn and yellowed, covered in tight, frantic script. Elias's writing. The blood binds it. I refused, and now it waits. If you find this, seal it, salt, fire, anything, or it takes you too. My hands went cold. What? He hadn't finished it, and whatever he'd called was still here. I stuffed the page in my pocket and ran upstairs, slamming the door. Night was falling fast, shadows stretching across the kitchen. I locked the basement, shoved the table against it, and sat there, panting. The house stayed quiet, but I knew it wouldn't last. It never did. At 11 p.m. it started. A thud from below, deep and hollow, shaking the floor. Then the hum, loud enough to rattle my teeth. I grabbed the flashlight, the page, the letters, anything to make sense of it, and sat on the couch, waiting. The footsteps came next, not from the stairs this time, from the basement, pacing below me. Thud, thud, thud. The air turned cold, sharp, and the lights flickered, dimming to a dull glow. Then the whisper, low, insistent, everywhere. Open it. I clutched the page, eyes darting. The box was still in the cabinet, but I felt it pulling like a magnet. The footsteps stopped, and a new sound cut through, a slow, wet scrape like something dragging itself up the stairs. I bolted to my feet, flashlight aimed at the basement door. It shook once, hard, the table sliding an inch. Open it, the whisper said again, right behind me. I spun, beam slashing the dark. Nothing. But the cold tightened, and the scrape grew louder, closer. The door rattled again, wood splintering, and I ran upstairs to the bedroom, slamming the door and shoving the chair under the knob. The house roared to life. Thuds, hums, whispers overlapping, and I sat there, flashlight dying, knowing I couldn't hide forever. Friday morning, I woke up curled on the floor, flashlight dead beside me. The bedroom was dim, the hall light off. Hadn't I left it on? My breath puffed out in faint clouds, even though the windows were shut tight. The chair was still wedged under the doorknob, but it felt flimsy now, like it wouldn't stop a damn thing. Last night replayed in my head, the thuds, the scraping, that whisper right behind me. I hadn't slept, not really, just passed out from sheer panic. I crept to the door, ear pressed against it. Silence. No hum, no footsteps. The house felt empty, but I didn't trust it. Downstairs, the kitchen was a mess. The table shoved aside, the basement door cracked open an inch. I hadn't touched it since barricading it, but there it was, gaping like a mouth. The box sat on the table again, letters spilling out, Elias's frantic handwriting staring up at me. Burn it all. My hands shook as I shoved them back in, locking the lid. This time, I wedged it under the couch, out of sight. Coffee didn't help. My nerves were shot, every creak making me jump. I couldn't stay here, not like this. But where was I supposed to go? The divorce had cleaned me out. This house was all I had. I paced, clutching Elias's torn page from the basement. Asterisk, the blood binds it. Seal it, salt, fire, anything. Asterisk, he'd refused and it had gotten him. I wasn't him though. I could fight this, figure it out. Right? I grabbed my phone and searched again. Occult rituals, binding spirits, anything that matched his ramblings. Most of it was junk, crystal healing blogs, fake psychics, but a few sites mentioned old rites. Salt circles to trap things. Fire to burn them out. Blood to seal a pact. My stomach turned at that last one, but Elias's words stuck. It waits. Whatever he'd called, it was still waiting, maybe for me now. I had salt in the kitchen, table stuff not much. No fireplace matches, but the candle lighter might work. I dumped the salt into a bowl, grabbed the lighter, and headed to the basement door. If Elias had started this down there, maybe I could end it. My hands were sweaty, slipping on the knob as I pulled it open. The damp smell hit me, thicker now, like wet dirt and something sour. The stairs creaked under my weight, louder than before, and the dark swallowed my flashlight's weak beam. The basement looked the same, crates, mirror, that black stain, but the air felt heavy like I was wading through it. I knelt by the ash patch, sprinkled salt over it, tracing a shaky circle. "Stay out," I muttered, feeling stupid but desperate. I flicked the lighter, flame sputtering, and held it to the salt. It didn't catch. Why would it? But the air shifted, a cold gust brushing my neck. I spun, light slashing the shadows. Nothing. Just the bike, the crates staring back. Back upstairs, I locked the door again, heart pounding. The salt was a long shot, but it was something. I sat on the couch, lighter in one hand, phone in the other, scrolling through more occult crap. Midday passed in a blur, me jumping at every noise, the house creaking like it was laughing at me. By afternoon, I was frayed, eyes burning from lack of sleep. I needed help, someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. I called Tom. He picked up on the third ring, voice casual. "Hey, what's up?" "I need to ask you something," I said, words tripping over each other. "The house, Crow. What else do you know?" "I'm hearing things. Seeing stuff." Pause. "You okay, man? You sound rough." "I'm not okay," I snapped. Footsteps, whispers, it's not just noises. I found letters. Elias wrote about shadows, writes. "It's happening again." Another pause, longer. "Shit. Look, I don't know much, just what Grandpa said." Crow was deep into weird stuff, talking to things that shouldn't answer. People thought he went nuts, but maybe not. "You sure it's not just the place getting to you?" "It's not," I said, voice tight. "It's real." "What do I do?" "I dunno. Move out? Burn it down?" He laughed, then stopped. "Seriously, be careful. Call me if it gets worse." He hung up, leaving me staring at the phone. Burn it down. Elias had said that too. Night came fast, the sky bruising purple outside. I didn't bother with work, just sat, lighter flicking on and off, listening. The house stayed quiet too long, and that scared me more. At 10 p.m. it broke. A thud from the basement, loud enough to shake the floor. Then another and another, faster, angrier. I stood, lighter trembling, as the hum kicked in, rattling the windows. The air turned cold, sharp, and the lights dimmed, buzzing like dying flies. Footsteps next, heavy, stomping up the stairs. The basement door rattled, wood groaning, and I backed toward the couch, lighter flaring. "Stay down there." I yelled, voice cracking. The rattling stopped, but the hum grew, vibrating in my chest. Then a new sound, a low, wet growl like something choking on itself, coming from the kitchen. I crept forward, lighter raised, and peeked around the corner. The cabinet was open, the box on the floor, letters scattered. Above it, the air twisted, dark, thick, bending like heat off pavement. My breath caught as it stretched, tall and thin, a shadow with no source. It didn't move, just hung there watching. I flicked the lighter higher, flame spitting, and it flinched, barely but enough. "Get out," I whispered, stepping closer. The growl deepened, and the shadow shifted, edges blurring. The cold slammed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs, and the lighter slipped, flame dying. The shadow lunged, fast, silent, brushing my arm as I stumbled back. It felt like ice and needles, burning where it touched. I hit the couch, scrambling for the lighter, and lit it again. The shadow was gone, but the growl lingered, fading into the walls. I sat there, panting, arm throbbing where it had grazed me. The skin was red, raw like a frostbite burn. The house settled, light steadying, but I didn't move. The box lay open, Elias's words mocking me. "The blood binds it, salt hadn't worked. Fire barely phased it." Blood, I couldn't think about that. But it wanted something, and it wasn't waiting anymore. Morning broke, gray and bleak. I didn't sleep, just watched the kitchen, lighter dead, arm aching. The shadow was real. Elias's door was open and I was running out of ways to close it. Saturday morning, I didn't even pretend to get up. I stayed on the couch, arm throbbing where that shadow had touched me, the red mark pulsing like a bad bruise. The lighter sat useless beside me, out of fluid, and the box of Elias's letters mocked me from the kitchen floor. The house was quiet again, too quiet, like it was gloating after last night. I could still feel that cold, needle-sharp graze, hear that wet growl fading into the walls. Whatever it wasn't just watching anymore, it was testing me. I couldn't sit there forever. My head was a mess, fear, exhaustion, anger all tangled up, but I had to do something. Elias's words kept looping. Asterisk, the door is open. Seal it, salt, fire, anything. Asterisk, salt flopped. Fire pissed it off. What? I shoved that thought down, but it kept bubbling back. I grabbed the torn page from the basement, reread it. Asterisk, it waits. If you find this, seal it, or it takes you too. Asterisk, he'd refused the blood and he'd vanished. I wasn't him, but I wasn't ready to bleed for this either. I hauled myself up, wincing as my arm brushed the couch. The kitchen smelled sour again, sharp and rancid, like something dead under the floor. I ignored it, grabbed the box, and dumped the letters on the table. There had to be more, some clue, some way out. I shuffled through them, hands shaky, until I found one I'd skipped before, dated October 25, 1923. The ink was blotchy, like he'd been sweating over it. Asterisk, the book showed me the sigil, carved it in the cellar floor, under the ash. It's the door, the anchor. They come through there, drawn by the words. I tried to burn it out, but the knife wouldn't cut deep enough. The shadow grows stronger, presses closer. I hear it in my sleep now, calling. Asterisk, a sigil, a carving. My pulse quickened. The basement, that black stain wasn't just ash, it was covering something. I'd missed it, too freaked out to look closer. I grabbed a kitchen knife, dull but it'd do, and headed for the basement door. It was still cracked open, the table shoved aside from last night's chaos. The damp smell wafted up, heavier now, mixed with that sour rot. I took a deep breath, flicked on my phone's flashlight, since the real one was toast, and started down. The stairs groaned, louder than ever, like they might snap. The basement air clung to me, thick and cold, and my light barely cut the dark. The ash patch was there, salt scattered from my pathetic circle. I knelt, brushing it away with my sleeve, and saw it. Faint lines etched into the concrete, worn but deliberate. A jagged star, crisscrossed with spirals, maybe a foot wide. The sigil. My stomach dropped. This was it, the door Elias wrote about. I pressed the knife to it, scraping at the lines. The blade screeched, barely scratching the surface, but the air shifted, sharp, electric, like a storm brewing. A low hum started, faint at first, vibrating up my legs. I kept going, digging harder, chips of concrete flaking off. The hum grew, rattling my teeth, and the cold hit, fast, brutal, turning my breath to fog. I glanced up, light sweeping the shadows, and froze. The air bent near the crates, twisting into that tall, thin shape again. It didn't move, just hovered, edges blurry like smoke. The growl came next, wet and deep, rolling through the dark. I gripped the knife, heart slamming, and stabbed at the sigil, gouging a chunk free. The shadow flinched, shrinking back, and the growl spiked into a snarl. Stay away. I yelled, voice raw, and kept cutting. The concrete fought me, but I hacked at it, sweat stinging my eyes, until the star was a mess of broken lines. The hum stopped, sudden and deafening. The cold eased, and the shadow faded, dissolving into the dark. I sat back, panting, knife clattering to the floor. The sigil was ruined, ugly, uneven, but broken. Maybe that was enough. I staggered upstairs, legs shaky, and slammed the door. The house felt lighter, like it had exhaled, but I wasn't dumb enough to trust it yet. Back in the kitchen, I collapsed at the table, phone light dimming. The letters stared up, Elias's panic mirroring mine. I'd stopped it for now, but his warnings nagged me. The blood binds it, destroying the sigil might have pissed it off more. I needed more than guesses. I grabbed my keys and headed out, locking the door behind me. Mrs. Hargrove might know something, anything, to fill the gaps. She was on her porch, hunched over a cup of tea when I walked up. Her eyes narrowed as I approached, sweaty and wild-eyed. You look like hell, she said, voice sharp. What's it done now? Everything, I blurted. Footsteps, shadows, it's real. I found Elias's letters. He did rituals, opened something in the basement. I broke it, the carving, but I don't know if it's enough. What do you know about him? She set her tea down, slow and deliberate. Told you he was strange. Folks said he talked to spirits, dug up things he shouldn't. My ma saw him once, late at night, pouring something red into the ground out back. Blood, she thought. After he vanished, people heard things, screams, banging. No one stayed long after that. Blood? I echoed, throat tight. He wrote about it, said it binds whatever he called. I'm not doing that. Then you're braver than him, or dumber, she said, squinting at the house. If he started it, he didn't finish it. You might have to. She turned away, muttering, good luck, like it was a curse. Back inside, night was falling fast. I locked up, shoved the table against the basement door again, and sat with the knife and Elias's letters. The broken sigil might have bought me time, but Mrs. Hargrove's words, asterisk you might have to asterisk, sank in deep. I didn't want to believe it. At midnight it hit. A thud from below, hard enough to shake the walls. The hum roared back, louder, angrier, and the cold swept through, frosting the windows. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, fast, not slow this time, and the door buckled with splintering. I grabbed the knife, backing toward the living room as the growl erupted, echoing everywhere. The shadow spilled out, taller, sharper, clawing at the air. It lunged and I swung the knife, blade slicing nothing but cold. It grazed me again, arm, chest, burning like ice, knocking me to the floor. The growl turned to a scream, high and jagged, and the lights died, plunging me into black. I scrambled up, knife shaking, and ran, upstairs to the bedroom, slamming the door. The chair went under the knob, but it wouldn't hold. The house shook, thuds and screams blending, and I knew I'd only made it mad. Sunday morning, I woke up sprawled across the bedroom floor, knife still in my hand. The chair was tipped over, the door cracked open an inch, but nothing had come through, or so I hoped. My chest ached where the shadow had grazed me last night, a dull burn under my shirt, and my arm was stiff, the red mark darker now, almost purple. The house was silent, but it wasn't calm. It was smug, like it knew it had won a round. I pulled myself up, wincing, and checked the damage. The hall light was dead, bulb blackened inside, and the air smelled faintly of smoke, like something had burned out. Downstairs was worse. The basement door hung off one hinge, the table flipped on its side, and Elias's box lay smashed, letters scattered like confetti. The kitchen floor was cold, frost rimming the edges, even though it wasn't winter. My breath puffed out as I stood there, staring at the wreckage, feeling like I'd lost something I couldn't name. I didn't clean it up. Couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my head felt foggy, like I'd been awake for weeks. I grabbed the knife, the torn page from the basement, and a handful of the letters, shoving them into my jacket. Coffee wasn't an option, my stomach was a knot, so I sat on the couch, staring at the basement stairs through the broken door. That shadow wasn't just pissed anymore, it was hunting. Elias's words kept circling back. The blood binds it. Mrs. Hargrove saying I might have to finish what he wouldn't. I pulled out the torn page, reread it, asterisk seal it, or it takes you to asterisk, and flipped through the letters again. One near the bottom caught my eye, dated November 10th, 1923, ink smeared like he'd been crying. Asterisk, the book lied. The sigil wasn't enough. It's a beacon, not a lock. They come through, endless unless I give them what they want. Blood on the mark, spoken words to bind them. I tried salt, fire, prayers, nothing holds. The shadow's not alone now. There are more pressing at the edges. I see them in the mirrors, hear them in the walls. I won't do it. I'll burn this place first. Asterisk. My throat went dry. More of them. Mirrors. I glanced at the living room wall. No mirrors here, but the basement had that cracked one leaning against the crates. I hadn't looked at it close, too busy freaking out over the sigil. My gut twisted. If Elias saw things in mirrors, maybe that's where they were coming from now. Not just the carving, but something else he'd left behind. I grabbed the knife and my phone, flashlight app barely cutting the gloom, and headed down. The basement air hit me hard, damp, sour, with a metallic tang I hadn't noticed before. The sigil was still there, hacked up from yesterday, but the ash around it was smeared, like something had dragged through it. I swung the light to the mirror, its surface dull and streaked, and stepped closer. My reflection stared back, pale, hollow-eyed, but the edges flickered like static on a bad screen. I tilted the phone, and the flicker sharpened. Shapes, tall, thin, shifting, moved behind me in the glass where nothing stood in the room. My heart slammed as I spun, light slashing the dark. Empty. Back to the mirror, they were still there, crowding closer, edges bleeding into each other. A low growl rumbled, not from the room but the glass, vibrating in my chest. I stumbled back, knife raised, and the shapes lunged, stretching the surface, warping it like rubber. I swung, blade cracking the mirror down the middle. The growl spiked into a scream high and piercing, and the shapes dissolved, glass shattering across the floor. The air snapped, cold, electric, and the hum kicked in loud enough to shake the walls. I ran, feet slipping on the stairs, and slammed the basement door shut, though it barely hung on its hinge. The hum chased me, buzzing in my skull, and the cold followed, frosting my hands. Back in the living room, I collapsed, knife clattering beside me. The mirror was gone, but I'd stirred something up, worse than before. The house creaked, slow and deliberate, like it was waking up. I grabbed Elias's letter again, scanning it. Blood on the mark, spoken words. He hadn't said what words, but the sigil was the mark. Had to be. I'd broken it, but maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe it needed sealing like he'd written. I couldn't think about blood, not yet. I searched my phone again, hands trembling, for anything on occult bindings. One site mentioned a chant, Latin, simple. Asterisk claudere porta sanguine sigillo. Asterisk closed the door, seal with blood. It sounded like a bad movie, but it fit Elias's ramblings. I scribbled it on the torn page, staring at the words, my pulse racing. If I did this, it'd be over, or I'd be screwed. Night fell fast, the sky black outside. I didn't move, just sat, knife in one hand, phone in the other, waiting. At 11 p.m. it started again. A thud from below, then another, building into a rhythm that shook the floor. The hum roared, windows rattling, and the cold swept in, sharp and biting. Footsteps pounded, not just one set now, but many, overlapping, climbing the stairs. The broken door buckled, splintering, and I stood, knife shaking, as the growl rolled through, wet and furious. They came fast. Shadows, tall, thin, too many, spilled from the basement, air twisting around them. The lights flickered, died, and the room plunged into dark, my phone's beam the only glow. They didn't lunge, just circled, edges blurring, pressing closer. The cold burned, my breath fogging, and the growl turned to whispers, garbled, overlapping, boring into my head. Open it. Give it. Now. I backed toward the couch, knife slashing air, and yelled the words, asterisk, claudere porta, sanguine sigillo, asterisk, voice cracking. The shadows froze, the hum stuttering, but they didn't leave. The whispers sharpened, mocking, and one lunged, grazing my leg, ice and fire, dropping me to my knees. The knife fell, and I scrambled for it, shouting the chant again. Nothing. They pressed in, cold tightening, and I knew they wanted the blood. I grabbed the blade, hand trembling, and pressed it to my palm. One cut, quick, shallow, blood welling up, hot and sticky. I stumbled to the basement stairs, shadows trailing, and smeared it on the sigil's ruins, chanting through gritted teeth. The hum spiked, the cold slammed into me, and the shadows screamed, high, shattering, before collapsing into the dark. The air snapped, warm and still, and the house went silent. I fell back, panting, blood dripping on the concrete. It was over, or so I thought. Upstairs, the lights flickered on, weak but steady. I bandaged my hand with a dish towel, shaking, and sat there, staring at the basement. The sigil was quiet, the shadows gone, but the weight stayed, heavy, watchful, waiting. Monday morning, if it was Monday, I'd lost track. Dawn crept through the windows, pale and thin. I sat slumped against the kitchen wall, the bloody dish towel wrapped tight around my hand. The cut stung, shallow but raw, and my head throbbed like I'd been hit with a brick. The basement door hung crooked, silent now, and the sigil downstairs was just a smeared mess of concrete and blood. The shadows were gone, the hum dead, the cold lifted, but I didn't feel safe. I felt hollow, like I'd spent something I couldn't get back. I dragged myself up, legs wobbly, and checked the house. The living room was a wreck, couch skewed, Elias's letters crumpled on the floor, the knife lying where I'd dropped it. The lights buzzed faintly, flickering like they might give up again, but they held. Upstairs, the bedroom was untouched, mattress still askew from my last frantic night there. No frost, no whispers. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The house felt too still, like it was playing dead. My phone was almost out of juice, 3% battery, screen dim. I plugged it in, sank onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. The chant, asterisk, claudere porta, sanguine sigillo, asterisk, echoed in my head, Latin I'd butchered but somehow worked. The blood had done it, like Elias said. Sealed the door, sent those things back. But his last letter nagged me, asterisk, there are more, pressing at the edges. Asterisk, what if I'd only shut one crack, not the whole damn rift? I couldn't think straight. Sleep hadn't come since Friday, just snatches of blacking out between panic. My arm still burned where the shadow grazed me, and my chest ached, a dull bruise under my shirt. I unwrapped the towel, wincing. The cut was red, jagged, but not deep. It'd scab soon. I washed it in the sink, water stinging, and rewrapped it with a cleaner rag. Coffee next, black, bitter, barely keeping me upright. I drank it standing, eyes on the basement door, waiting for it to twitch. It didn't. The day dragged on, quiet, dragging into noon. I tried to work, laptop open, headset on, but my hands shook too much to type. Every creak made me flinch, every shadow in the corner had me grabbing the knife. I kept it close now, blade dull but comforting. The sour smell crept back, faint at first, then stronger, wafting from the stairs. I ignored it, told myself it was leftover rot, but it stuck in my throat. By afternoon I couldn't sit still. I grabbed Elias's letters, spread them out again, looking for anything I'd missed. One near the bottom, dated November 7, 1923, stopped me cold. The ink was faint, shaky, like he'd been running out of time. Asterisk, the book warned of the edges, mirrors, cracks, places they slipped through. The sigil calls them, but it's not the only door. I broke the glass in the cellar, burned the ash, but they find ways. The words hold them, the blood locks them, but only if you name them. I didn't. I couldn't. They're older than names. Asterisk. My stomach sank. Mirrors? I'd smashed the one downstairs, but what about cracks? Edges? I hadn't named anything, just shouted the chant and bled. Maybe that's why it felt off, why the quiet didn't stick. I scanned the room, eyes catching on the fireplace. The bricks were old, uneven, gaps spiderwebbing the mortar. A faint draft brushed my neck, cold and quick. I stood, knife in hand, and peered closer. The cracks shifted, subtle like a trick of the light, but real. I backed away, heart thudding. The house was full of edges, floorboards, walls, every damn seam. They could slip through, I hadn't sealed shit, just pissed them off. I grabbed the salt, half a shaker left, and sprinkled it along the fireplace, hands trembling. It felt useless, but I needed something to do. The sour smell thickened and a low hum started, not the roaring buzz from before, but soft, needling, burrowing into my ears. Night came slow, shadows stretching across the floor. I didn't lock myself in the bedroom, too cramped, too vulnerable. I stayed downstairs, knife on the coffee table, salt shaker beside it, phone glowing with the chant written out. The hum grew, weaving through the walls, and the air turned cold, not sharp like before, but slow, creeping, settling into my bones. I sat rigid, listening as the floorboards creaked, not random but rhythmic like steps circling the room. I grabbed the knife, stood, and swung the phone's light around. Nothing. Just the couch, the scattered letters, the dark mouth of the basement stairs. The creak stopped, but the hum didn't, and the cold tightened, prickling my skin. Then a whisper, soft, garbled, from the fireplace. Not enough. My breath hitched, light darting to the bricks. The cracks twitched again, wider, and a shadow bled through, thin, jagged, curling like smoke. I yelled the chant, asterisk, claudera porta, sanguine sigillo, asterisk, voice hoarse, and tossed salt at it. The shadow flinched, shrinking, but didn't vanish. The whisper laughed, low and wet, and the hum spiked, rattling my teeth. More cracks moved. Under the windows, along the stairs, shadows seeping out, small but growing. I swung the knife, blade useless, and shouted again. They hissed, retreating slightly, but the cold deepened and the whispers multiplied. Give it. More. Now. I stumbled back, tripping over the letters, and grabbed the salt, dumping it in a sloppy line across the floor. The shadows paused, edges quivering, but pressed closer, testing it. My hand throbbed, blood seeping through the rag. I hadn't given enough, or the chant was wrong, or Elias had screwed me with half a plan. The fireplace shadow stretched, taller now, and the growl returned, rolling through the room like thunder. I ran to the kitchen, yanked open drawers. Nothing but forks, a spatula. The shadows followed, slow, deliberate, their whispers weaving into a chant of their own, words I couldn't catch. The lights flickered, dimming, and the sour smell choked me, thick as fog. I grabbed the knife again, backed against the sink, and sliced my palm deeper. Hot, sharp pain, blood dripping fast. I smeared it on the salt line, shouting the chant through gritted teeth. The hum screamed, the shadows lurched, then collapsed, sucked back into the cracks like water down a drain. The cold snapped away, the light steadied, and the house went still. I sank to the floor, blood pooling under my hand, chest heaving. It worked, again, but the quiet felt thinner this time, brittle, like it could shatter any second. I bandaged my hand with shaking fingers, tighter this time, and sat there, staring at the salt and blood. Elias hadn't named them. I hadn't either. The shadows were gone, but the weight stayed, watchful, patient, lurking in the edges. Tuesday morning, or whatever day it was, sunlight barely touched the room, filtered through a gray haze outside. I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the sink, bloody rag soaking through again. My hand throbbed, the deeper cut raw and pulsing, and my head felt like it was splitting open. The salt line stretched across the floor, smeared with red, a pathetic barrier against whatever kept crawling back. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it, a weight in the air pressing down like a held breath. I hadn't slept, not really. My eyes burned, gritty and dry, and every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the drip of the faucet, hit like a gunshot. The shadows were gone, sucked back into the cracks last night, but the whispers lingered in my head, faint and mocking. Asterisk not enough. More. Asterisk Elias's letters were scattered around me, crumpled, his warnings screaming louder than ever. Asterisk they find ways. The blood locks them, but only if you name them. Asterisk I hadn't named anything, just bled and begged, and it wasn't holding. My phone was dead, battery drained from the flashlight app, cord tangled somewhere under the couch. I didn't care. Work, normal life, it was a joke now. I grabbed the knife, its blade nicked and dull, and stood, legs shaky. The sour smell was everywhere, thick and cloying like the house was rotting from the inside. I checked the basement door, still busted, hanging loose, and the sigil downstairs stayed quiet, blood dried into the concrete. But the cracks, the edges Elias wrote about, they were alive. I could feel them watching. I paced, knife in one hand, salt shaker in the other, almost empty now. The fireplace cracks twitched when I passed, subtle shifts in the dark, and the stairs groaned without me stepping on them. The house was waking up, slow and deliberate, like it had been toying with me all along. I couldn't keep doing this, cutting myself, chanting, praying it'd stick. I needed to end it, whatever that meant. I grabbed Elias's last letter, the one about burning it all, and reread it, hands trembling. They're older than names. If I couldn't name them, maybe fire was the only way. I had no lighter fluid, no matches, but the stove was gas. A crazy thought, torch the place, walk away, but it stuck. I shoved the letter in my pocket and headed to the kitchen, turning the burners on low. The hiss of gas filled the air, sharp and chemical, mixing with the sour rot. I stopped, staring at the blue flames. Burn it all. Elias's plea, Mrs. Hargrove's offhand jab, asterisk, burn it down, asterisk. But I couldn't. Not yet. I turned the stove off, the hiss dying, and sank into a chair. My hand ached, blood seeping through the rag again, and my chest tightened like something was sitting on it. The air shifted, cold, slow, creeping up my spine, and the hum started, faint but growing, needling into my skull. I stood, knife raised as the floorboards creaked, soft, circling, closer. The lights flickered, dimming, and the cold deepened, frosting the windows. A whisper slithered from the walls, more, and the cracks flared, shadows bleeding out, small at first, then stretching tall and thin. They didn't lunge, just loomed, edges quivering, pressing the air tight. The hum roared, shaking the house, and the growl rolled in, wet and guttural, everywhere at once. I shouted the chant, asterisk, claudera porta, sanguine sigillo. Asterisk, voice raw, stabbing the knife at nothing. They flinched, but didn't retreat, whispers sharpening into a hiss. My hand throbbed, blood dripping, and I smeared it on the salt line again, chanting louder. The shadows screeched, shrinking back, but the cold tightened, and the growl turned to a scream, high, jagged, splitting my head open. Then it came. Not from the cracks, but the basement, a heavy thud, then another, shaking the floor. The broken door slammed wide, and footsteps pounded up, fast and uneven, like something dragging itself. I backed toward the living room, knife shaking as the air bent, dark, thick, taller than before. It spilled out, a shadow sharper than the others, edges clawing, and the cold hit like a wave, knocking me to my knees. I swung the knife, blade slicing air, and it lunged, fast, silent, grazing my chest, burning cold and hot at once. I fell, gasping, and it loomed over me, growling low, wet, a sound that sank into my bones. The room darkened, lights dying, and I felt it, heavy, pressing down like it was sitting on my chest. My breath came short, fogging in the dim glow of my dropped phone, and the whisper hissed, "Give it," right in my ear. I scrambled back, hitting the couch, and grabbed the knife, slicing my hand deeper, blood pouring now, hot and slick. I smeared it on the floor, shouting the chant through gritted teeth, but the shadow didn't flinch. It grew, stretching to the ceiling, edges splitting into more shapes, tall, thin, endless. The hum screamed, the house shook, and the weight crushed me, pinning me down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just felt the cold sink deeper, the growl vibrating in my skull. My vision blurred, blood pooling under me, and I choked out the words one last time, asterisk, claudera porta, sanguine sigillo. Asterisk, praying it'd take. The shadow froze, the hum stuttered, and the weight lifted just enough. I rolled, gasping, and saw it, eyes in the dark, not human, glowing faint and yellow, staring from the shadow's core. It screamed, high, shattering, and the others joined, a chorus that tore through me before they collapsed, sucked back into the basement like smoke up a flue. The lights flickered on, weak and buzzing, and the cold snapped away. I lay there, panting, blood sticky on the floor, chest heaving. The house settled, creaks fading, but those eyes burned into my memory, watching, waiting. I crawled to the couch, clutching the knife, and sat there, shaking, blood dripping down my arm. It wasn't over. I'd pushed it back, but it wasn't gone, just deeper, biding its time. Morning came slow, gray and heavy. I didn't move, just stared at the basement stairs, the smeared salt and blood. The house was quiet, but the weight stayed, those eyes that scream, etched into me. I couldn't stay here. I wouldn't. Tuesday morning, or whatever day it was, sunlight barely touched the room, filtered through a gray haze outside. I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the sink, bloody rag soaking through again. My hand throbbed, the deeper cut raw and pulsing, and my head felt like it was splitting open. The salt line stretched across the floor, smeared with red, a pathetic barrier against whatever kept crawling back. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it, a weight in the air, pressing down like a held breath. I hadn't slept, not really. My eyes burned, gritty and dry, and every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the drip of the faucet, hit like a gunshot. The shadows were gone, sucked back into the cracks last night, but the whispers lingered in my head, faint and mocking. Asterisk not enough. More. Asterisk Elias's letters were scattered around me, crumpled, his warnings screaming louder than ever. Asterisk they find ways. The blood locks them, but only if you name them. Asterisk I hadn't named anything, just bled and begged, and it wasn't holding. My phone was dead, battery drained from the flashlight app, cord tangled somewhere under the couch. I didn't care. Work, normal life. It was a joke now. I grabbed the knife, its blade nicked and dull, and stood, legs shaky. The sour smell was everywhere, thick and cloying like the house was rotting from the inside. I checked the basement door, still busted, hanging loose, and the sigil downstairs stayed quiet, blood dried into the concrete. But the cracks, the edges Elias wrote about, they were alive. I could feel them watching. I paced, knife in one hand, salt shaker in the other, almost empty now. The fireplace cracks twitched when I passed, subtle shifts in the dark, and the stairs groaned without me stepping on them. The house was waking up, slow and deliberate, like it had been toying with me all along. I couldn't keep doing this, cutting myself, chanting, praying it'd stick. I needed to end it, whatever that meant. I grabbed Elias's last letter, the one about burning it all, and reread it, hands trembling. They're older than names. If I couldn't name them, maybe fire was the only way. I had no lighter fluid, no matches, but the stove was gas. A crazy thought, torch the place, walk away, but it stuck. I shoved the letter in my pocket and headed to the kitchen, turning the burners on low. The hiss of gas filled the air, sharp and chemical, mixing with the sour rot. I stopped, staring at the blue flames. Burn it all. Elias's plea, Mrs. Hargrove's offhand jab, asterisk, burn it down, asterisk. But I couldn't. Not yet. I turned the stove off, the hiss dying, and sank into a chair. My hand ached, blood seeping through the rag again, and my chest tightened like something was sitting on it. The air shifted, cold, slow, creeping up my spine, and the hum started, faint but growing, needling into my skull. I stood, knife raised as the floorboards creaked, soft, circling, closer. The lights flickered, dimming, and the cold deepened, frosting the windows. A whisper slithered from the walls, more, and the cracks flared, shadows bleeding out, small at first, then stretching tall and thin. They didn't lunge, just loomed, edges quivering, pressing the air tight. The hum roared, shaking the house, and the growl rolled in, wet and guttural, everywhere at once. I shouted the chant, asterisk, claudera porta, sanguine sigillo. Asterisk, voice raw, stabbing the knife at nothing. They flinched, but didn't retreat, whispers sharpening into a hiss. My hand throbbed, blood dripping, and I smeared it on the salt line again, chanting louder. The shadows screeched, shrinking back, but the cold tightened, and the growl turned to a scream, high, jagged, splitting my head open. Then it came. Not from the cracks, but the basement, a heavy thud, then another, shaking the floor. The broken door slammed wide, and footsteps pounded up, fast and uneven, like something dragging itself. I backed toward the living room, knife shaking as the air bent, dark, thick, taller than before. It spilled out, a shadow sharper than the others, edges clawing, and the cold hit like a wave, knocking me to my knees. I swung the knife, blade slicing air, and it lunged, fast, silent, grazing my chest, burning cold and hot at once. I fell, gasping, and it loomed over me, growling low, wet, a sound that sank into my bones. The room darkened, lights dying, and I felt it, heavy, pressing down like it was sitting on my chest. My breath came short, fogging in the dim glow of my dropped phone, and the whisper hissed, "Give it," right in my ear. I scrambled back, hitting the couch, and grabbed the knife, slicing my hand deeper, blood pouring now hot and slick. I smeared it on the floor, shouting the chant through gritted teeth, but the shadow didn't flinch. It grew, stretching to the ceiling, edges splitting into more shapes, tall, thin, endless. The hum screamed, the house shook, and the weight crushed me, pinning me down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just felt the cold sink deeper, the growl vibrating in my skull. My vision blurred, blood pooling under me, and I choked out the words one last time, asterisk, claudia porta, sanguine sigillo. Asterisk, praying it'd take. The shadow froze, the hum stuttered, and the weight lifted just enough. I rolled, gasping, and saw it, eyes in the dark, not human, glowing faint and yellow, staring from the shadow's core. It screamed, high, shattering, and the others joined, a chorus that tore through me before they collapsed, sucked back into the basement like smoke up a flue. The lights flickered on, weak and buzzing, and the cold snapped away. I lay there, panting, blood sticky on the floor, chest heaving. The house settled, creaks fading, but those eyes burned into my memory, watching, waiting. I crawled to the couch, clutching the knife, and sat there, shaking, blood dripping down my arm. It wasn't over. I'd pushed it back, but it wasn't gone, just deeper, biding its time. Morning came slow, gray and heavy. I didn't move, just stared at the basement stairs, the smeared salt and blood. The house was quiet, but the weight stayed, those eyes that scream, etched into me. I couldn't stay here. I wouldn't. I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. The gray light creeping through the windows was enough, barely enough, to get me moving. My hand was a mess, blood crusted under the soaked rag, and my chest burned where that thing had grazed me, a dull ache that wouldn't quit. The knife lay beside me on the couch, streaked red, and Elias's letters were a crumpled heap on the floor. The house was silent, but it wasn't dead. I could feel it, those yellow eyes still watching from somewhere deep, waiting for me to slip. I stood, legs wobbly, and grabbed what I could. My phone, dead, useless, went into my pocket, along with the torn page from the basement, the one with Elias's last warning. Seal it or it takes you too. The knife stayed in my hand, a dull comfort, and I stumbled to the bedroom, shoving clothes into a duffel bag. Socks, a hoodie, whatever I could reach. None of it mattered, just something to carry, something normal. My laptop stayed downstairs, abandoned. I wasn't coming back for it. The stairs creaked as I descended, louder than ever, like the house was groaning awake. The living room looked like a war zone, salt and blood smeared across the floor, the basement door hanging limp, the air thick with that sour rot. I didn't stop to look, didn't dare glance at the fireplace or the cracks I'd fought last night. Those eyes, glowing, unblinking, flashed in my head and my breath hitched. I had to get out. No. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter, hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. The sour smell choked me, stronger here, and the floor felt cold, frost creeping up the edges again. A hum started, faint, distant, buzzing in my ears, and I froze, keys clutched tight. Not again. Please, not again. It grew, soft but insistent, vibrating through the walls, and the air shifted, cold, slow, brushing my neck like fingers. I bolted for the front door, duffel banging against my leg, knife slipping in my sweaty grip. The lock stuck, knob rattling, and the hum spiked, rattling the windows. A whisper slithered from the stairs, "Stay," and I yanked harder, cursing, until the door flew open. Fresh air hit me, sharp and clean, and I stumbled onto the porch, nearly tripping over the steps. The hum stopped, cut off like a snapped string, but the cold followed, nipping at my heels. I didn't look back. My car sat in the driveway, hatchback still half-packed from moving in. Ironic now. I threw the duffel in, climbed into the driver's seat, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. My hand throbbed as I gripped the wheel, blood oozing through the rag, but I didn't care. I peeled out, gravel crunching, and sped down the street, heart pounding in my throat. Mrs. Hargrove's house flashed by, curtains still drawn, and I wondered if she'd hear me leave, if she'd care. She'd warned me, hadn't she? You might have to. I hadn't finished it, hadn't burned it, hadn't named them. I'd just run, bleeding and broken, hoping distance would save me. The town blurred past, corner store, library, empty streets, and I kept driving, no plan, no destination, just away. The rearview mirror stayed empty, no shadows, no glowing eyes, but my skin prickled like something was still there, just out of sight. The hum was gone, the cold fading, but the weight didn't lift. Those whispers, that scream, etched into me. I turned onto the highway, pushing the speedometer, and tried to breathe. My hands stung, chest ached, and my eyes burned, tears mixing with sweat. I'd escaped, hadn't I? Miles ticked by, 10, 20, 30, and the sky stayed gray, heavy with clouds. I stopped at a gas station, hands trembling as I pumped fuel, glancing over my shoulder every second. The clerk inside barely looked up, some kid scrolling his phone, and I paid with crumpled bills, avoiding his eyes. Back in the car, I unwrapped the rag, blood sticky, cut scabbing, and rewrapped it with a napkin from the glove box. It'd hold for now. I kept driving, radio off, silence pressing in. My mind wouldn't settle. Elias's letters, the sigil, those eyes, looping over and over. They're older than names. I hadn't sealed it right, hadn't burned it, hadn't given enough. The chant had pushed them back, the blood had bought me time, but those cracks, those edges, they were still there in the house, waiting. I'd left it open for someone else. Night fell, dark swallowing the road. I pulled into a motel lot, some dive off the highway, neon sign flickering vacancy. My legs ached as I climbed out, duffel slung over my shoulder, knife tucked in my waistband. The clerk, a tired woman with gray hair, handed me a key, muttering about checkout, and I shuffled to room 12, locking the door behind me. The room smelled like mildew and cheap cleaner, but it wasn't sour, wasn't cold. I dropped onto the bed, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling, knife beside me. Sleep didn't come easy. My hand throbbed, the cut pulsing under the napkin, and my chest felt tight like that weight hadn't left, just shifted. I closed my eyes, willing the dark to stay empty, but the whispers crept in, faint, garbled, like static. Asterisk stay. More. Asterisk. I jolted upright, heart racing, and grabbed the knife, swinging it at nothing. The room was still, peeling wallpaper, sagging curtains, no cracks twitching, but the air felt wrong, heavy again. I stood, pacing, knife shaking. A hum started, low, distant, not from the room but inside me, buzzing in my skull. The mirror above the dresser caught my eye, surface dull and streaked, and I froze. My reflection stared back, pale, wild, but the edges flickered just like the basement's had. A shadow moved, thin and tall, behind me in the glass where nothing stood in the room. The hum grew, the cold brushed my neck, and a whisper hissed, "You." I swung the knife, cracking the mirror, glass shattering across the floor. The hum stopped, the shadow gone, but my breath fogged and the weight pressed harder. I grabbed my duffel, bolted out the door, and ran to the car, keys slipping in my bloody hand. The engine roared, and I peeled out, tires squealing, driving into the dark with no direction, just away again. The road stretched on, endless, and the hum followed, faint but there, needling my ears. My hand throbbed, chest burned, and those eyes glowed in my mind, watching, waiting. I'd left the house, but it hadn't left me. Whatever Elias opened, it wasn't tied to the walls. It was loose, patient, hunting. The next person to move in, the next crack, the next mirror, they'd feel it too. And me? I'd hear it forever, whispering in the dark.